Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to today's sessions. My name is Marvin Brown. I work for the National Association of State Foresters Forest Resource Management Committee. And these four sessions today are the combined product of that committee, Forest Resource Management, also NASF's Forest Markets Committee, and NACD's Forestry Resource Policy Group. Got the pleasure of kicking out the first session today. It is Understanding Forest Markets and Their Importance to Forest Landowners. The two presenters are Brian Brashaw and Rick Cantrell. Brian is Assistant Director for Wood Innovations with the U.S. Forest Service. The USDA Forest Service Wood Innovations Program supports wood product market-based approaches to support long-term sustainable management of National Forest Systems lands and other forest lands. This team is working collaboratively and strategically with Wood Innovations regional specialists, forest products lab researchers, and external partners to advance forest products markets to support sustainable forest management, carbon storing building materials, and economic development. Emphasis areas are mass timber, renewable wood energy, emerging products like biochar, and also cellulosic nanomaterials. Rick has worked for academic institutions, government agencies, and NGOs. He helped establish the Sustainable Forestry Initiative Incorporated, eventually joining that organization as one of its first staff members and ultimately serving as vice president and chief operating officer. Rick is the CEO of BlackBriar Environmental LLC, an international natural resources consulting firm. Working with the National Association of State Foresters, Rick publishes a weekly Forest Markets newsletter distributed worldwide. And if you don't get that, it's a good one to sign up to. Since its inception, Rick has been involved with Keeping Forest, the initiative. He supports the overarching partner strategy of that initiative and administers the Promoting Forest Products team. So I'm going to turn it over to Rick, and he can take it from here.
Thank you, Marvin. I appreciate the introduction and welcome everyone. Happy to be here with you today. I'm going to give you a really quick 30,000 foot level overview of the NASF Forest Markets Committee. As Marvin mentioned, I am the staff support for that committee. Our chairman, Scott Bissett, is also on this webinar. I wanted to recognize him, as well as some of our other members like Scott Phillips from South Carolina. Okay. There we go. So I want to talk a little bit about NASF. I'm going to talk a little more about the Forest Markets Committee. Then I'm going to tell you a few things that we're working on as part of our 2021 work plan. First, NASF. Who is NASF? NASF represents the state and territorial forest interests by influencing forest policy and efforts from healthy and sustainable trees and forests across the landscape, including on private lands. NASF was established in 1920. It is a nonprofit in DC. And last year we planned to celebrate our centennial. Unfortunately, COVID got in the way of that. We're still on track with trying to celebrate this coming September at our annual meeting in Pittsburgh. And you'll be hearing and seeing more about the centennial celebration as we move closer to that date. So the Forest Markets Committee basically supports the overall NASF program goals, which are established by the members, by the NASF Executive Committee each and every year. And our role is to develop partner support in the areas where we can influence forest markets and influence forest policy. We're a small committee, but we do have the opportunity to work in broader partnerships to advance our goals. So why are state foresters interested in forest markets? It's pretty obvious when you think about what do working forests need. They need strong forest markets so that they have the ability to manage forests, especially private forest landowners. We've all heard the no markets, no money, no management, no conservation that has been out there for a while. And we know that if we have good working forest, we do have jobs, we do have clean air, we have clean water, we have wildlife habitat, recreation, because all that helps lead to well-managed forests and strong markets. So that's the reason why markets are so important to NASF. Several years ago, the committee did some research and published a white paper on what they felt like were the reasons for the forest markets being in decline at that time. And as a part of that work, we came up with a vision statement. And the vision statement basically was we wanted to recover the United States' historical 25% share of industrial roundwood production worldwide. And one of the findings we had in that report, and a subsequent report that the Forest Service did for us, was that the number one driver of this was housing markets. And so that's something that we paid a lot of attention to in terms of building codes and things like that, that can hamper the use of wood in construction. So we talked about influencing policy. These are just a few examples of some of the things that we work on. And a lot of our work is done through the Wood Products Alliance, which is a group in Washington, D.C. that has a lot of different members that are really tied into the legislative and policy arena there in D.C. Robin Whitney, who's the policy director for NASF, and I both participate in this group. They have conference calls every 2 weeks. We go over federal and also state legislation and decide if there's a need to, for example, do some lobbying on a particular issue, write letters, work with building codes officials. All types of different activities come out of that group. Other things we do, we participated recently in the SFI standard revision process. There are things in there that impact private forest lands, and then there's things in the SFI and other standards that impact state forest lands that are enrolled in these certification programs. We're engaged in trillion trees and going to continue to do that. We monitor some things like hardwood export markets, and if there's opportunities for us to make a difference in those, we certainly weigh in. Wood-based construction, I mentioned that in building codes. We want to make sure that every state has good building codes on the books, and restrictive codes, which show up from time to time, at least attempts to be more restrictive with wood-based construction, that we're able to work through the state forester and other avenues in those states to try to prevent those from occurring. Biomass is something that's continually monitored. Tim Foley with the Southern Group does a lot of work with that on the European export market. And so we keep tabs on that as well and jump in and assist Tim whenever he might need it. Mentioned keeping forests as part of my bio. That's a group that's a Southern-based group. It definitely, though, has implications nationwide. The Keeping Forests organization started about 5 years ago, and it's dedicated to helping keep our southern forests as forests. And as part of a mapping exercise that we did, one of the major levers that we identified as having the potential to be a major impact on keeping forests was markets. And so we have a markets team that's been working in the mass timber arena most recently, working with architects, public building officials, codes officials to promote the use of wood in mass timber. Mentioned Forest Markets News. We do this weekly. We have these topics that you see, and there can be others, but this is sort of the standard set. Forest markets in general, housing. I mentioned how important housing was to the roundwood production, overall production for U.S. Working forests, new products and technology like mass timber, renewable energy like biomass and pellets, and then international news of interest. I comb through numerous sources each week to try to select just those that would be of most importance and interest to our subscribers. There's my email address. If you would like to get on this mailing list, please drop me a note and I'll add you. Here's an example of one that we just put out last week or 2 weeks ago. You can see sort of some of the topics here in the forest markets section of that. That's really all I plan to cover today, to give you a high-level overview of what the Forest Markets Committee is all about. And I know we're going to get a lot more details on some of the specifics in forest markets from Brian Brashaw, who is up next.
Thanks, Rick. I appreciate it. I'd definitely give a shout out to Rick and his newsletter. If you all have been reading his newsletter every week, most of what I'm going to tell you is old news. Rick does a terrific job of really bringing things together, and I think that he and his committee have done an outstanding job of pulling everything together. Okay. So hopefully this has gone full screen now. Rick, can you give me a thumbs up if that's the case? All right, good deal. Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Brashaw, and I'm the Assistant Director for our Wood Innovations Program within the U.S. Forest Service. That's in our Washington office and in state and private cooperative forestry. I've been in that position now for about 3 months. But one of the things that I'm bringing with me is I've been the liaison to the Markets Committee for the last 2 years, and that's really been a highlight of some of the work that I've gotten to do, engaged with state foresters and their committee staffs, their utilization marketing committees. So I looked at our attendance list today, really a great mix of folks, people that I've worked with in the past, and colleagues of mine, both from the Washington office and formerly and also within our Wood Innovations regional program efforts as well. So it's really great to see everybody, and look forward to kind of sharing a few things that's going on right now. Our Wood Innovations team, small but mighty, small in number but mighty. Certainly each region has a Wood Innovations coordinator, and I think we've got a couple here from Region 9 that are joining the call today. But it really includes our Washington office staff, and it includes a couple folks from the Forest Products Laboratory, my former unit. As you can see, we're really engaged with a lot of partners, and some of our key partners include the state regional associations for their Forest Utilization Committee or their Wood Utilization and Markets Committee, and that's a really important opportunity. And then I get to engage at the NASF level as well. I'm also based in Minnesota, so I'm currently actually here in International Falls, Minnesota, but there's a connection, and I think that's an important connection that allows me to understand the things that are facing our national forest system, but also the long-term engagement that we've had with the states themselves. I'm also very connected closely, formerly as a staff, but also still working very closely with the leadership at the Forest Products Laboratory. We do have a new director. Tony Ferguson retired in December of 2020, and Cindy West has been named director of the Forest Products Laboratory. She'll be relocating to Madison sometime this summer. So Cindy West is the new director of the Forest Products Laboratory. So just a little bit of information, and I think, again, if you've been looking at Rick's newsletters and just the media, we've seen a lot of things that are happening in wood markets nationally and internationally. I'll share with you a little bit in more detail here on a few things that are happening in pulp and paper, some of the lumber prices, and both the rise and the steady decline, albeit to still high levels, decline over the last 2 weeks. Exports are still relatively strong to Europe and to Asia, and we're certainly seeing some continued and ongoing investments there. And then I want to share a little bit about what the Forest Service is engaged with. What about our programs? We did have 2 announcements for our Wood Innovations Grant Program and our Community Wood Energy Grant Program, and highlight those a little bit on just some of the things that are happening. And if you really want to take a little bit deeper dive, our Wood Innovations website, and I'll put the link in the chat box, direct link in the chat box later. So believe it or not, I'm not leading with lumber. I think we've all been lumber priced as a topic, but this is some data that I see and have permission to share from AF&PA, and this really talks about production And you can see that the last decade, some of the changes that we have seen and very dramatically seen, especially on the decline in printing, writing paper, and newsprint. And I think that, again, that information is not necessarily new information for those states who have paper industry, who have seen declines in the number of printed newspapers. And just in Duluth, Minnesota, our 7-day-a-week newspaper is now only being printed on paper 2 days a week. Verso Paper closed 2 mills, one in Duluth and one in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. The Duluth mill is under agreement to be restarted in a more of a container or brown paper versus the graphic paper that they had in the past. So these are the kinds of changes that we've seen, and they certainly have a dramatic and significant impact. Containerboard production has certainly increased, printing, writing down, boxboard, tissue, and printing paper are relatively flat or stable over the last decade. Lumber prices. This is some data that was published recently in Forest to Market, and the top line, the red line, is 2021, and that's what we're looking at now. And you can see that it has, it didn't even capture the highest of the high spike that we saw, but it certainly has been trending in a downward direction. And it's been a pretty volatile 2020 and going into 2021. And there is a lot of conversation about the causes for all of this and the impact to landowners. I think that we all realize that this has not trickled down necessarily to landowners, especially in eastern and southern parts of the United States. We're seeing some value increase to landowners in the Pacific Northwest recently, but for the most part, it hasn't trickled back to the landowners themselves. What are we up against? And these are specific mostly to softwood or composite plants, but we saw during the pandemic a emptying out of the supply chain, preserving cash, the inventories dropping dramatically. A challenge for industry to respond based on staff and based on the ability to bring employees in, but also to operate at full levels based on COVID shortages in terms of employees. Last week I talked to 3 different manufacturers. They're all hurting for employees, and that is certainly a limit in their ability to continue and expand production. Take a step back to the last recession, and we lost capacity. We had mills close after the recession, whether it be oriented strand board, lumber, hardwood lumber, softwood lumber, we certainly saw a dramatic amount of changes there. So there have been closures that date back to the last recession. And, in Minnesota, where I live, we saw, dramatic changes in the oriented strand board industry and the engineered strand products. Those mills closed, and just starting to see benefits. There was an announcement yesterday. Congratulations to folks here in Minnesota that have been working on that, for Huber to put a new OSB plant in near just west of Grand Rapids, Minnesota. Demand is up, dramatically up, and I think that's a huge part of this is that there has been a change. Their housing starts have significantly increased. Remodeling is up. There's certainly a lot on the demand side that has driven a lot of what we're seeing right now. Housing. For those of you that are trying to sell homes, I guess, if you look at the chart on the right, the inventory of existing homes is pretty low. And I think we probably all know people that are having multiple offers based on homes. And depending on where you live, prices are dramatically increasing. I tend to look at Portland news, family there, and the median price of homes in Portland went up $15,000 just last month. So these are some of the things that we're seeing a lack of supply of existing homes, which again is putting pressure into new construction and quite a bit of other things that are happening. So again, it's a complicated issue that is slowly starting to work itself out. And as I think we're going to see continued high prices. Most organizations are projecting still relatively high prices through the rest of this construction season into next year. There is investment, there is new capacity coming on. A lot of it's in the U.S. South. So I do think those are some of the things to kind of keep an eye on here into the future. last week, for the first time, there was a Northern Hardwoods conference, a virtual conference co-hosted by the Wisconsin DNR and the Forest Service Northern Research Station, and we put together a markets committee. I felt that it was really important for folks to, in hardwood management, to think about some of the things that are happening in the hardwood industry. So Judd Johnson from HMR made a presentation. Again, these are things I think for those of us that are familiar in the industry. We saw downturns in U.S. production in the early 2000s. That's when I was making trips to Europe or to Asia, to China, to specifically think about how we create an open markets for hardwood lumber. The recession had an impact, and then in Judd's words, the hangover from that recession. Again, it took until almost 2012 to see some of that bounce back. And then as things were moving forward, the trade war in 2018, 2019 certainly had an impact. China's volume demands have dropped. Vietnam is up, but those are all some things that people are looking at and thinking about as they go forward. And then in the hardwood sector, there's been, again, quite a number of changes as we go forward. We've seen a big shift here, since 2007, where grade lumber, that lumber that really carries the highest value, that's a much smaller percentage than industrial lumber in the U.S. marketplace. Our shipping pallets, crating, those are higher in volume and a greater percentage, but they're also less in terms of value and return. So again, we've seen this kind of fundamental change take place since the last recession, and pallet shortages and some other things I think are all things that we are seeing and will probably be seeing for some period of time. The other big change that we've seen, and this is a more of a big picture shift, and Judd talked about this a little bit, and then also Troy Brown is president of Kretz Lumber in Antigo, Wisconsin. He's currently the president of the Hardwood Manufacturers Association. We're seeing less hardwood go into new construction per capita, and we're also seeing less American hardwoods go into remodeling. We have a lot of products that look like wood, feel like wood. They don't taste like wood. We're seeing vinyl and ceramic tiles that have a wood look. We're seeing very thin decorative veneers. So these are the kinds of fundamental changes that we're really seeing here as since that 2008, where the value, the amount of wood, hardwood that's gone into construction has really dropped. Since 2019, the hardwood industry has come together and focused on the Real American Hardwood Coalition, which is a promotional campaign to, one, do some fundamental research to understand what is the values of hardwoods, but then at the consumer level, at the store level, to try to help educate and inform. And I think you're going to continue to see this roll out here in the future. So Real American Hardwood Coalition is in progress of trying to do some expanded work. On the softwood side, Softwood Lumber Board actually has a checkoff program, and that checkoff program has been very effective in helping expand and invest in new construction as well. I've shown this slide before, and it's something that folks can pull up every month. EIA looks at pellets, and it looks at pellet exports to both on the production side, sales side, and whether, and you can see the greatest percentage in volume is going to be in the U.S. South, and it's going to be utility grade pellets for Europe. Although there are increasing interest and demand for looking at wood pellets in Asia. So there's Korea, but especially Japan. That's quite a bit of information and tracking there. So those that are in the Midwest are very challenged. Those that are more interior and can't put them cost effectively to overseas markets are really challenged. But there has been, I think, stability at least with domestic market production here in the last year or so. So I'm shifting a little bit now from kind of an overview of what's happening in the marketplace. And again, we could spend a half an hour on every one of those topics, but to talk a little bit more about the Forest Service and mass timber. We believe that this is a strong market, and we're investing in it and continuing to invest in it because it opens up markets that we haven't been in before, markets that are the 5-story and above buildings that typically would have been heavy to concrete and or steel. Woodworks is a key partner of ours, and you can see that this is just their mass timber map. Over 1,000 buildings now that are either constructed or in design, and some of these are really signature projects. Ascent project in Milwaukee, just blocks from the Forest Service regional office, started flying timber, so to speak, into place over the last week, and they'll be doing about a floor a week as they kind of optimize here. So the first 6 stories are steel and concrete, the next 19 are wood. So again, a very high visibility project that's taking place, and we can find those in many places. The Forest Service is finishing construction of our first mass timber project in the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest Supervisor's Office, and some folks of ours took a tour there yesterday, and again, just a great opportunity for the USDA and for the Forest Service to reassert leadership in green building construction. There are significant plants in the United States, and Structure Lam is in, I think, near final stages of startup. I know that I saw Joe Fox on the call a little bit earlier. Joe probably has his finger to that one more than anybody else in the country, and so there's a lot of good work going on. Very small micro-based organizations like Euclid, and then there's another one called Timber Age in Colorado, Durango, Colorado, just doing enough mass timber for a couple buildings a year, but they all have growth. Katerra has been in the news, and just north of Katerra, looks like Vaughan Timbers got wiped off my screen there, but I think folks know that Katerra as a corporation has closed. Their CLT plant is just one little part of that. They had 3,000 employees in the U.S. and around the North America. The CLT plant was about 150. So again, that's production that's been taken out, but Smart Lam has 2 operations. And, we see Ferris and D.R. Johnson, Vaughan, and others. There's a lot of production in Canada. There's also production in coming from Europe. So I think one of the things that we are cognizant of and we're aware of, and we are very much thinking about, is how to make sure that we have markets that benefit our domestic producers, but also domestic fiber. And so those are the kinds of things that we are very carefully looking at here over the next year. We made some movement this year in our wood innovation grants for preference to domestically sourced CLT, but that's again, it's something we're aware of and we're thinking about. A couple other investment opportunities that we're doing, again, just to build markets. We've engaged with a group called Impact Finance Center to try to connect those that want to make investments in green building to those that need investing. And I think Steph Gripney has really done a terrific job. So they have monthly, quarterly meetings, virtual meetings that really kind of bring together this high net worth individuals, high net worth foundations, and those that need investment in the building space. So I think it's really got some terrific opportunity. And ThinkWood can resume their mobile tours here. They were, traveling around doing quite a bit of stuff along the way. So just a couple more slides here on some Forest Service things, and we want to leave time for questions. Our Wood Innovations grant program supports market and wood energy development. This year we awarded a slightly increased level. Usually we're right around 8 million. This year we were able to boost that up to about 9. About half of the funds are mass timber, half of the projects, but we did have 5 specific projects of biochar, and then 5 that I would say are associated with expanding markets for wood energy, including some stationary wood energy equipment opportunities. We have a second grant program, 2018 Farm Bill authorized, that we manage, the Community Wood Energy and Wood Innovations grants. It's a complicated mouthful. It confuses people because you use the word Wood Innovations in 2 different grants. So we just call it the Community Wood or Community Wood Energy program. In that case, it's really, shovel-ready wood energy systems that are less than 5 megawatt, thermally led systems, or it can offer some investments in innovative wood product facilities. So this allows us to cost share investment in more equipment and installation of equipment. Right now, the Farm Bill does limit us to 75-25 ratio. So 75% of the funds are directed to wood energy projects, 25% to innovative wood products. This year we had $2 million available, and the president's budget currently has 10 million. It's authorized at 25 million in the Farm Bill. So we hope to see again another opportunity to invest on the ground as we move forward. You know, a shout out here to Patrick Rapold is on the call. Patrick helps co-manage some of the logistics for the Wood Innovations Program, Community Wood, and he put together a really nice map this year that kind of highlights where some of these investments are. And you can see the mass timber currently still somewhat emphasize the Pacific Northwest, but those we believe many of those projects are catalytic in a way that they can offer experience and direction to other parts of the country. The Wood Energy Technical Assistance Team, so that's a national team. Lou McCreary is the point of contact and the lead on that. This just shows that, you know, the range of locations that they have been involved with in terms of providing pre-feasibility or technical assistance moving forward. A heavy percentage of these are actually implemented, and so I think that's really the you know, people ask about kind of the secret sauce or what's the, you know, being engaged, having this kind of support, being able to, you know, really understand the economics and opportunities leads to on-the-ground success. And Lou has done a terrific job managing that program with Wilson Engineering and a few other folks in the West now. And then Torfaction, Forest Services, along with U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, has made a significant investment. And they are starting up this plant. I know that we've been talking about this for a long time, but they're actually, that picture down there in the bottom right is roasted wood chips that become more brittle and intensify energy value as it goes forward. So it's in production. It's in John Day, Oregon. It's a 100,000 ton plant. They have trial markets waiting, both in Japan, but also domestically. So again, it's an opportunity to use a lot of this low value, small dimension, small diameter materials that find themselves challenged to find other cost competitive markets. My hope in our investments is that they can prove out this technology and that we can see this scale of plants be located in very cost-effective places that really need this opportunity. Biochar is another one. We're hearing it all the time. And I think we have been involved in some portable or mobile demonstrations where you can use a curtain burner, but you can also pull biochar down off the bottom. And so that are things that can be done in the forest or at a landing. But again, it has to be managed. We did some trials last year in Oregon. The equipment company, Airburner Inc. is working on this. Charlie Becker from our staff is involved with them along with the U.S. Biochar Initiative. So I do think there's some things out there. The technology for making biochar isn't that, you know, it's known. It's really how do we find markets at scale that can allow us to do that. So those are the kinds of things that, again, the ability to demonstrate and move forward is really key as we go forward. So with that, I think we'll bring it back to, I'll stop sharing and bring it back. And I'm sure Rick would be happy to take any questions he can, and as will I. So thanks a lot
Brian,
for the opportunity.
Brian, I've got one question for you. It's in the chat. By the way, a big tip of the hat to Brian for being with us today. He's taking time away from his fishing vacation to do this webinar. So thank you, Brian. The question is about your paper and paperboard production slide. I think the answer to this is U.S. only, but the question is, was it North America or U.S.?
I believe that it is, those are U.S. information, and I have permission to share other, you know, some other slides that kind of talk to capacity. You know, we just talked about production. If you start to overlay capacity, unfilled capacity, there's quite a bit out there. But one of the great places is if you go to AF&PA's website in their news releases, they do release quite a bit of public information in their news release. And then I've got a little bit more of a detailed report that we can share. But Julie, happy to connect up with you. And but I'm with Rick. Those are U.S. production data. And I saw a note there from Joe Fox too that Structural Am is soft opening, so that means they're making product.
Yeah, back to the production question. The American Forest and Paper Association, AF&PA, does an annual capacity survey, and so I know that's U.S. based. And like Brian said, you can get a lot of that information. I think the report is also available to purchase if you're not one of the participants in the the survey. They've been doing that for a long time. Just got a question from the mysterious Joe Fox from Arkansas. Rick, could you and Brian discuss labor shortages as they impact markets? Brian, I know you had some of that information in your presentation. I'll give you the first shot.
Yeah, hi Joe. Thanks for the question. You know, definitely. You know, I'm hearing this nationally. You know, my conversations in last week were state of Oregon, state of Wisconsin, and some folks in the hardwood industry in Virginia. You know, it certainly is an impact. And one of the challenges that COVID has exposed is the fact that employees, they had a hard time continuing to run at full operations based on quarantines and shutdowns and some of those other kinds of things. You know, and there is, you know, a set of factors, I think, that are facing all of them, and every situation is a little bit different. You know, some folks that you talk to have, you know, are talking about things like unemployment and some of the unemployment conversation. Some have been faced with, you know, looking for employees in manufacturing space even beyond that. So I do know that many states are really trying to take an aggressive role in identifying and building capacity within the state on workforce and workforce development, but it is certainly an issue that is being faced nationally, and it is limiting. It's limiting the ability to go to a second shift in some cases, to even operate at a full shift, because they're doing some things, and some of the labor challenges are continuing to encourage automation. So some of the folks in the plywood industry, where there may have been some manual positions, they're now looking at investing in automation as we go forward.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, particularly given some of the commentary we've heard out of the National Association of Home Builders about the lumber prices and the impacts on new residential housing, and sort of pointing the finger at the forest products industry as being at fault for all of that. When if you look across all the supply chains out there, there's many supply chains that are being stressed right now. The furniture industry is under tremendous stress. We recently ordered a new sofa. It's going to be 6 months because of a foam shortage used in furniture. So there's all kinds of supply chain challenges. It's not just in the forestry world. Chlorine for swimming pools is in short supply because there was not only COVID, but also there was a major plant fire at one of the major plants for producing chlorine tablets for pools. So there's a lot of supply chain stresses, and certainly labor is one. As Joe asked the question, and we're seeing this in a number of different ways, like Brian said. Truck drivers are another place where there's shortages of labor that folks are scrambling to try and find more qualified truck drivers. So another question just came in from Doug Rushton. What would be the best way for conservation districts to be more engaged? And this message also went to Brian. So Brian, you want to take a first shot?
I don't have a lot of experience, folks. I apologize for that. I think you know, I would defer to you, Rick, and maybe Mike as well.
So I would say one of the ways that the conservation district can be more engaged is know what's going on within your district and within your state. Things like building codes. If your state hasn't adopted the most recent international building codes, which allows for taller wood buildings up to 18 stories, get involved, talk to your public building codes officials, and support things like that. Keep an eye out for restrictive codes that pop up in municipalities, also at the state level. We recently had, here where I live in Clemson, South Carolina, it was a couple of years ago, one of the local codes officials wanted to restrict the use of wood in commercial buildings because it's flammable. And so that was something that we had to battle here locally. So look for opportunities like that, and ask for wood. That's something you can always do. Is in whatever you're doing in your professional or personal lives, ask for wood.
And I think I'd just add on real quick. I see Mike turned his camera back on. I think, one area of opportunity is to think about, biochar is I try to use the word help, not hype, hashtag help, not hype. Biochar has a lot of interest right now, but I think one of the things we have to do is we have to find markets at scale that are cost effective. So I think as you are exploring, and whether that can occur at the local level, when it really comes to some of these districts, thinking about programs that are in place or that could be put in place to really help support it, because it doesn't matter if you're in Minnesota, Wisconsin, or Washington State. The need for markets for underused, low value, and residues is important, industrial residues. So, Mike, I see you got your camera on there.
Yeah, I just add to those. I think Rick had some good ideas, and really part of this session was for our group, our RPG, to explore some of these possibilities and where we can support that. You mentioned biochar, and we have examples of districts in the Pacific Northwest, really based on landowner interest, that came to the districts and said, can you help us with this? And in other areas with small markets, that was the origin of districts helping the landowners. But I think conservation districts reaching out to partners, whether it's state forestry agency partners or others, on where they need support, and then where landowners have interest. And I would just mention too, John McAlpine is on this call, and John is kind of our point person for markets, and somebody that's going to explore this topic for conservation districts further after this session. And I know that John and I are going to connect up here in the future to make sure there's an increased awareness on some of the things that we're doing. The national partnership with U.S. Biochar Initiative, for instance, I think it can be really catalytic and supportive of trying to move some of these things forward.
So there's another question from Joe Fox asking about new mill machinery. I know that that's something we've been looking at in terms of why can't we get CLT manufacturers, more of them located, for example, in U.S. South, and part of that's the capital needed to start up a new facility. But Brian, what about new mill machinery and existing manufacturing facilities, particularly sawmills? I know I see lots of articles about folks upgrading because of the efficiencies there, and I'll tie that in with the other odd phenomenon that's happening, particularly here in U.S. South, is with some of the new sawmill technology, it's limiting the ability to process large logs because they're not set up for that. And that's something we're hearing a lot more about here in South Carolina. Scott may have some comments on that as well.
Joe, if you wouldn't mind flipping your microphone on, what specifically were you thinking, Joe?
We had a mill fire, Brian, at one of our big mills a couple of Sundays ago, and I'm not real sure which machine it got, but it would be like a chipping saw, one of the primary breakdown machines, I think. And they're talking about delivery time to replace that machine of well into 2022. They're really not sure, and the whole mill depends on it, so they're down for at least the rest of 21 and into 22. And there's a supply chain problem with new machinery for mills, whether it's a new mill or whether it's an existing mill. That's what I was asking about. Yep.
Yeah, and there's definitely a change. I mean, one of the challenges has been a long lead times on whether it be Rick's couch or new mill manufacturing equipment. So I do think those are some of the things that we're really facing in terms of longer term programs and investment. I think that those situations are pretty unfortunate. I hope to see continued expansion and opportunities for U.S. producers. A lot of the capacity there, and there's some really good engineering companies. And I think one of the things that most larger manufacturers have is they already have an engineering company on the ready who can really help search throughout the world in terms of some global supply. There's the other thing I'll mention, for the Community Wood Grant Program has some funds in there that allow to support innovations, and especially as companies are thinking about retooling and looking at some other areas. You know, the program this year, you know, only had $2 million in it, so it's not a huge amount of money. But I do think that that is something that, as companies are thinking about innovations as they move forward, that's a place that they could look at and consider going forward.
So Brian, you mentioned during the biochar discussion, a curtain burner. Tell us what that is.
Yeah, so if you think about, you know, one of the challenges that you know, many states are faced with is slash that doesn't have a market, and how do we dispose of that? And so, you know, often it's pile burning, and this is, think of it as a cleaner, more efficient way to pile burn, where we're using a efficient curtain burner, you know, a large capacity vessel to be able to relatively cleanly dispose of these slash piles, but also to be able to pull some biochar off the bottom. There's 2 companies currently in the US that are trying to do this. And so it's a somewhat safer, cleaner way, but you also have the ability to produce and co-produce biochar off the bottom. So that's what we're talking about. The Forest Service has a research agreement with a group called Air Burners. And but there is a second one out there. I think Tiger Cat is the second company that produces these products. But again, it's going to be how do you do it in a scale and volume, and but ultimately, where's the markets, right? And how do we continue to develop markets for biochar? And we're making progress, but it's not, you know, we have to be cautious on hype, and they have to be defensible. So I think that's the other place to think about is, how do we find markets that are valuable? You know, the early thought on biochar was it's all going to be horticulture or agricultural amendments. And that's been a slow uptake. It can be a big volume, but it's a slow uptake. But there are other ways to do this in terms of mineland reclamation. The Forest Service is funding work there. Cattle feed additives in Nebraska, there's some really good work going on there. So some of those other kinds of opportunities in terms of land filtration, you know, and then I think we're going to continue to see, as carbon markets evolve, as they potentially evolve, that putting that carbon back into the soil may have some cost benefits. I know we're running low on time here, but thanks a lot.
Yeah, we've got just a couple of more minutes left. If anybody has one very quick question, we can take it. But Mike has us on a hard stop at 10:50. So we can get one more quick question if you'd like to.
There's one from Mia that just came in, and I think you just addressed it, Brian. Here, we have heard some word feeding biochar livestock as an additive and seeing yield increases. Is this something you guys have heard of, or would that be a valuable market?
Yeah, we did fund that. The Wood Innovations Program provided some wood innovation grant funding to Nebraska Forest Service, which is leading that work. Heather Norbert, I think it would be a great point of contact. They've created something known as the Great Plains Biochar Initiative. And I would connect up with that, and certainly if folks will reach out to me, I'd be happy to make those introductions as well. But it's promising, and they're in actual trials right now with more than just, you know, 10 head of cattle. It's a larger scale trial that they're moving forward on.
Brian, how about putting your contact information in the chat box?
All right, thank you. I will do that. Yep.
Well, this has been great. Rick and Brian both sharing a lot of really good information. Appreciate that. The next session starts at 11 o'clock Central Time, and it'll deal with working with underserved landowners. I hope everybody will be able to join that one as well. And here's some more good information. As I said, we'll have 3 more sessions to go the rest of the day. And thank you again, Rick and Brian. It's been great.
You're welcome. I hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks, Brian.
Take care, all.
Thanks, everybody.